I used to start every morning with a tray of tea in my hands and the taste of silence in my mouth. The Hawthorne estate was grand, filled with gold-trimmed windows and floors so polished they reflected the cruelty of the people who lived there. I was the help, the maid in a pressed uniform, always 2 steps behind and never seen unless I made a mistake. And that morning, I made the worst mistake of my life. I existed. The day began like any other. I rose before dawn, tied my hair into a neat bun, and buttoned up my uniform until I could barely breathe. My name was Clara then, Clara with the soft voice, the downcast eyes, the one who never spoke back. I cleaned the same vases, folded the same sheets, scrubbed the same marble tiles that left my knees raw. But I didn't complain. I couldn't. I had nowhere else to go. My mother had worked in the same house before she died. Her only gift to me was a silver locket I wore tucked beneath my collar, the only piece of her I had left. And I kept it close, because memories were all I could afford. That morning, the youngest daughter, Lena, stormed into the parlor. Her heels clicked like threats on the tile. She was always the cruelest, the type of girl who called maids by the wrong names just to feel powerful. "Where is it?" she hissed. "Where's the brooch?" Mother's sapphire brooch was in the drawer and now it's gone. I was dusting shelves when she pointed at me. "You were in here yesterday. You were the last one." I froze, my hand still on the rag. "I didn't see anything, miss." "Didn't see anything," she mocked, folding her arms. "Of course you didn't. That's why your kind stays in the shadows, isn't it?" I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Mrs. Grimsby, the head housekeeper, appeared at the door. She didn't ask questions. She never did. She looked at me like she had always been waiting for the moment to throw me out. "Clara," she said sharply, "go pack your things. You're dismissed." I stood there, stunned, the dust rag still in my hand. "But I didn't. Do you want us to call the police?" Lena said sweetly. "Or will you leave quietly?" My throat tightened. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But I had learned a long time ago that tears were worthless currency in that house. So I nodded. I went to my small, windowless room at the back of the manor and packed what little I had, 2 dresses, a cracked hairbrush, and my mother's locket. I didn't even get to take the half sandwich I had saved for later. When I stepped outside, the sky was gray. Rain fell slowly, like the world was weeping on my behalf. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I walked down the long driveway until the estate gates shut behind me, the sound like a final judgment. I sat at the bus stop with my suitcase at my feet and nothing in my pockets. Not even the truth. That night, I found a cot in a shared women's shelter. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I replayed Lena's words, Mrs. Grimsby's scowl, and the way Victor, the Hawthorne heir, had walked past without even glancing at me. I was nothing to them. A maid. A name on a chore list. And now, a stain to erase. But I wasn't going to stay nothing. That night, I whispered to the shadows, to the version of my mother I still believed watched over me. They took everything from me. I'm going to take it all back. It wasn't just the job. It was the way they stole my dignity, the way they used silence as a weapon, the way I was discarded like the dishes I used to scrub. I would build something they couldn't ignore. And when I returned, it wouldn't be through the servant's door. It would be through the front gates, with keys in my hand. That was the night Clara died. And Isabel Vale was born. The name Isabel Vale came to me one morning while pouring coffee in a corner cafe on the city's south side. It was my 3rd job in a week, after quitting one and being fired from another. They told me I was too quiet, too plain, too forgettable to work front of house. But that's exactly what I needed to be. Forgettable. Invisible. Just long enough to rebuild. The name sounded like someone who belonged in a penthouse, not a pantry. Someone who would never be mistaken for a maid. It started as a name on a resume. Then it became the name on my business license. And soon, it would be the name the Hawthorns would learn to fear. I rented a basement studio in a crumbling apartment building with mold on the ceiling and broken windows that whistled in winter. But it was mine. I worked long shifts and took night classes online, studying hospitality management and real estate law with a hunger I had never felt before. Every penny I earned went into savings. Every insult I endured became fuel. It took me 2 years to crawl from broke to stable. Then something changed. Or rather, someone. I met Elliot on a Tuesday, just after sunrise, while waiting tables at a breakfast spot in the financial district. He was the only one who tipped in cash, and he always ordered the same thing, black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He asked me one morning why I never smiled. I told him smiles were expensive, and I was saving mine for something better. He laughed. The next week, he left his business card folded beneath the check. It said Elliot Rains, private equity. I didn't call. I Googled him first. And what I found made my heart race. Former tech founder. Investor in hospitality startups. Known for backing underdogs. I stared at the card for 3 days before calling. Our first meeting was in a bookstore cafe. I wore my one good blazer and lied through my teeth. I told him I had an idea for a boutique luxury chain focused on privacy and exclusivity. I told him I had clients ready and locations in mind. None of it was true. But I believed it would be, and maybe that was enough. Elliot leaned back in his chair, tapped his fingers on the table, and asked, "Who are you really, Isabel Vale?" I met his eyes and said, "Someone who's tired of being underestimated." He invested. Not much. Just enough to prove he wasn't joking. He gave me connections, a lawyer, and an accountant. In 6 months, I had my first lease on a waterfront villa an hour outside the city. I called it the Glass House. No staff. No press. Just discreet luxury and high security. The first few clients came from whispered recommendations, people who wanted peace and privacy without paparazzi. Then came the socialites, the writers, the secret affairs. Within a year, I opened a second location. Then a third. I was no longer just a maid with a locket. I was a business owner with anonymous investors and private invitations. I walked differently now. Spoke differently. Wore perfume that smelled like money and confidence. But beneath all that, I still remembered the smell of the Hawthorne estate. The way the chandeliers sparkled even when the family beneath them didn't. And then it happened. I was reviewing potential properties to convert when I saw it. A foreclosure notice buried in a real estate file. Hawthorne Estate. Listed for auction. Bankruptcy. Mismanagement. Outstanding debts. The home where I was fired in disgrace was now on sale to the highest bidder. I laughed so hard I cried. I didn't tell Elliot. I didn't tell anyone. I just wired the deposit and marked the date on my calendar. I didn't plan a strategy. I didn't need one. The moment I held the auction paddle in my hand, I knew I was going to win. And I did. In less than 10 minutes, the estate was mine. I didn't walk out of that room, I floated. All those years of silence, of scrubbing and folding and hiding, led to this. I now owned the very floors that once bled my knees. That night, I drove to the estate alone. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the iron gates. They looked smaller now. Or maybe I had grown. I stepped out, heels clicking, key in hand. The gates opened without resistance. And as I stood there, the gravel beneath my feet, the mansion silhouetted against the night sky, I whispered to myself, "Let's begin." I wasn't here to clean anymore. I was here to reclaim. I didn't need an invitation. I was the owner now. The first thing I did was tear down the servant's bell. It still hung in the hallway, crooked and dusty, a small brass reminder of who I used to be. I didn't need it anymore. No one would be summoned to bow, not in this house. Not unless I was the one doing the summoning. I walked through the estate alone that night. Each room held a memory, and most of them burned. The library where Victor once told me I wasn't allowed to touch the books. The dining room where Lena made me repeat her tea order 5 times just to humiliate me. The parlor where I was accused of theft and thrown out like garbage. But there were other memories too. Faint ones. My mother humming softly as she polished the silver. Her hands guiding mine as we folded napkins into swans. Her voice saying, "One day, you'll be more than what they see." I decided to keep only what she would have loved. Everything else could go. I hired contractors to restore the estate, but I was deliberate. No flash, no unnecessary opulence. Just clean lines, soft colors, and hidden strength. The floors were stripped and replaced. The chandeliers were rewired. I kept the main staircase, it was the only place in the house I had ever felt tall. I moved into the master suite, once occupied by the Hawthorne matriarch. I had stood in that room once before, holding a tray of orange juice she never touched. Now I opened the closet doors and filled them with tailored suits and silk blouses. My initials, IV, were embossed on everything. But I still kept my old uniform. Folded in a box in the back of the closet. Not because I missed it. Because I needed to remember what it felt like to wear it. One morning, as the final piece of furniture was delivered, I stood in the drawing room and looked up at the fireplace. The stone crest above it was chipped and faded, the Hawthorne family seal. I had spent years polishing that crest, memorizing every ridge and flourish while pretending not to hear the laughter in the next room. I stared at it now and made my decision. I didn't remove it. I carved my name into the stone beneath it. A new name beneath the old. A quiet rewrite of history. Isabel Vale. I sent out invitations the next week. Not emails. Not texts. Hand-delivered envelopes, stamped with wax and written in script. I called it a heritage preservation gathering. A small social for those interested in architectural legacy and the revival of historic estates. The kind of event that would attract exactly the sort of people who cared about appearances. And the Hawthorns cared more than most. I didn't invite them directly. I didn't need to. I knew they would hear. That Lena would stumble across the guest list on some socialite's post and recognize the estate address. That Victor would recognize the seal on the invitation and think it must be a distant cousin or obscure aristocrat reclaiming lost roots. I knew their pride wouldn't let them ignore it. And I was right. Within days, their assistant reached out to RSVP. A polite email requesting 2 seats for Mr. Victor Hawthorne and Miss Lena Hawthorne. I replied with a single sentence. We'd be honored. My staff was briefed. Every guest would be treated like royalty. But the Hawthorns? Their experience would be carefully curated. I assigned them to a table beneath the portrait of their ancestors who would no longer recognize them. I made sure their place cards were printed last. Their names smaller. Their tea lukewarm. Not enough to cause offense. Just enough to stir memory. I rehearsed my entrance in front of the mirror. Practiced my smile. My posture. The slight tilt of the head that said I see you, but I don't owe you anything. On the night of the event, I stood at the top of the staircase, watching the guests arrive one by one. I saw Victor before he saw me. Still tall, still composed, still walking like he owned every room he entered. Lena followed close behind in a borrowed dress I recognized from a resale boutique. The fall of the Hawthorns had been quiet, but not soft. I descended slowly, heels clicking against marble, each step deliberate. Heads turned. Conversations paused. And when Victor looked up at me, his brows drew together ever so slightly. Recognition, but not certainty. I smiled. Welcome, I said. I'm so glad you could join us. They both nodded politely. Neither of them asked who I was. Not yet. They wouldn't remember the maid. But they would remember this night. There's a certain thrill to watching people walk through a house they used to own. Without realizing they're guests now. I watched Victor scan the walls, eyes pausing on the new art, the different furniture, the missing family photos. His jaw clenched for just a second, the smallest twitch. Lena was worse at hiding it. She ran her hand along the banister, looked up at the chandelier, and tilted her head like a dog hearing a familiar whistle. I offered them a tour. They declined, of course. They couldn't admit they needed one. Instead, they wandered from room to room, moving like they were trying not to flinch at every change. I followed at a distance, drink in hand, smile fixed in place. The other guests were too busy gossiping and sipping champagne to notice the tension. But I noticed everything. When Lena found the parlor, she froze for a moment. It had been stripped of the heavy velvet curtains and gilded mirrors. The room where I was fired now had pale walls, modern lighting, and a single glass case on display. Holding a sapphire brooch. The same one she had accused me of stealing. She blinked, stepped closer, and read the placard. Artifact recovered during restoration. Owner, Isabel Vale. Her hands clenched at her sides. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. I moved to the kitchen, where staff bustled to and fro in silence and order. I had trained them myself. I didn't believe in screaming or snapping fingers. Every member of my staff was paid well, respected, and protected. They didn't fear me. They admired me. And they had no idea I used to wear the same apron they did. Tea will be served in 10, one whispered. I nodded. In the dining hall, the long table had been set with fine china and crystal glasses. Each place setting was marked with a name card. Victor and Lena's cards were tucked at the far end of the table, just close enough to hear me, just far enough to know they weren't important anymore. They sat across from a tech investor and the editor of a major fashion magazine. People who barely acknowledged them. People who didn't know, or care, who they used to be. I gave a short welcome speech. Polite. Measured. I thanked them for supporting heritage restoration. I spoke about the importance of preserving homes with history, even when the families who built them could not. There was a ripple of polite laughter. I raised my teacup. To new beginnings, I said. And long memories. I met Victor's eyes as I sipped. He was watching me more intently now. His brow furrowed, the wheels turning. Lena whispered something in his ear. He looked at me again. This time, not with interest, but with suspicion. I sat down and let the evening unfold. The food was flawless. The music subtle. The tea, intentionally, just slightly wrong. The kind of wrong that nags at someone who expects perfection. Lena kept touching her locket, her fake one. The real one was mine. Still tucked under my collar, next to my skin. Halfway through dessert, a guest leaned toward Victor and asked him what it was like to grow up in a place like this. His answer was tight. We didn't expect to come back under these circumstances. The guest laughed. Well, at least the new owner has good taste. That's when Victor looked at me. Not like a stranger anymore. Like someone reaching through fog. Have we met? He asked. I tilted my head slightly, just enough for my earring to catch the light. Why do you ask? You seem familiar. Perhaps in another life, I said. He didn't smile. Neither did I. After tea, I slipped away to the private study. I knew they'd follow. And they did. Victor knocked once before stepping in. Lena trailed behind him, arms crossed, eyes narrow. This house, he said slowly, belongs to you? It does. Your name? Vale. That wasn't the name of the buyer on the auction docket. It was the name that mattered. He exhaled, finally dropping the polished mask. You're Clara. Lena's face turned pale. The maid. I corrected. I was the maid. The silence that followed was everything I had waited for. They looked at me like they were seeing a ghost. Like their past had climbed out of the grave and now wore pearls and patent heels. You set us up, Lena whispered. No, I said calmly. You did that yourselves. I just sent the invitations. They didn't storm out. They didn't scream. They didn't beg. They simply stood there, eyes wide, mouth shut, as I poured myself another cup of tea. Would you like some? I asked. You remember how I used to serve it. I held the teacup steady as the silence stretched between us. It wasn't just awkward, it was brittle, the kind that shatters the moment someone breathes wrong. Victor stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to apologize or demand an explanation. Lena was worse. Her eyes darted from the gold detailing on the bookshelves to the crystal sugar bowl beside me, like she was trying to memorize her surroundings in case this turned into a nightmare she'd have to recount later. I placed the cup gently onto its saucer and leaned back in the chair that used to belong to her mother. So, I said, voice soft, how have you been? Victor blinked. What is this? Tea, I said. Just tea. You accepted the invitation. You knew we would. Of course. You could have sent it directly. That wouldn't have been any fun. He took a step forward. What do you want? You're in my home, Victor. Shouldn't I be the one asking that? His mouth opened, then closed. I could almost hear the questions lining up behind his teeth. Why now? Why this? What are you planning? But I didn't owe them answers. Not yet. I stood and walked past them, brushing Lena's shoulder just enough for her to flinch. Her perfume was the same cheap rose blend I remembered from the servant's laundry. The kind she used to demand I iron into her sheets. I turned at the door. Don't leave yet. I have something planned for the end of the evening. It would be a shame to miss it. Then I left them in that room, exactly the way I had left the estate years ago, speechless, stunned, and surrounded by a world they no longer controlled. Back in the ballroom, the guests were mingling. Music swelled from the string quartet, and laughter echoed between the marble columns. No one knew a storm had just broken in the study. I smiled at everyone. Thanked them for coming. Touched a few hands and nodded at a few admirers. I moved through the crowd like I belonged because I did. These people didn't know Clara. They knew Isabel Vale, young, accomplished, discreet. A woman who never gave interviews and always showed up with the right people at the right time. They whispered about me the way they used to whisper about the Hawthorns. And that was the sweetest part. They had become irrelevant. I signaled to my staff, and the next phase of the night began. A short program to honor the so-called legacy of the estate. One of my assistants took the stage and welcomed everyone's attention. She spoke about the history of the house, its role in regional development, and the restoration efforts made possible by generous donors. She invited me to speak last. I took the stage slowly, not with fanfare, but with silence. Every eye turned toward me. Even Victor and Lena's. Thank you all for being here tonight, I began. This house has seen many faces, many families, many fates. Some grand. Some tragic. All layered into its walls. I paused, letting my eyes scan the crowd. But sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes, the house remembers. And sometimes, it chooses someone new. A few guests clapped politely. I raised a hand. Before the restoration began, a few items were discovered hidden behind one of the walls in the parlor. One of those was a brooch, blue sapphire, rimmed in silver. Murmurs rose. A few heads turned. I continued. We traced it. It matched a theft report filed years ago. A maid was dismissed shortly after it vanished. But surveillance tapes recovered during renovations told a different story. I didn't have to say their names. I didn't have to point. All I had to do was glance, briefly, in Victor and Lena's direction. And just like that, the whispers started. People turned to them. Some subtle. Some bold. Lena's hands trembled. Victor's mouth was a thin, angry line. Sometimes, I said, it's not the house that needs restoring. It's the truth. I stepped down from the stage. Victor stood there, fists clenched, pride shattered. Lena looked like she was deciding whether to faint or flee. I walked past them slowly. Enjoy the rest of the evening, I whispered. We're serving one last course. I didn't wait for their reaction. I didn't need to. Their silence was the applause I'd been waiting for. The rest of the night passed in a blur of compliments, champagne, and careful glances. The Hawthorns left without saying goodbye. They didn't have to. I had said everything that needed saying. As the last guest departed and the music faded, I stood in the doorway of my estate. My estate. And for the first time in years, I felt full. Not just with triumph. But with something quieter. Something heavier. Closure. The next morning, the silence in the house felt different. Not empty. Not eerie. Just earned. I walked barefoot through the halls, sunlight slanting through the tall windows, warming the polished floors I used to scrub raw. The staff had already cleaned up from the night before. They moved with quiet efficiency, a kind of reverence, like they knew something sacred had happened. I paused in the parlor, now free of its heavy drapes and shadows, and stood before the display case holding the sapphire brooch. The one that had branded me a thief. I had thought about selling it once. Melting it down. Destroying it. But that would have made it disappear as easily as they had tried to make me disappear. Instead, I had turned it into proof. Not just for me, but for every girl who'd ever been blamed because someone else was better at lying. I didn't hear Victor arrive. I only noticed when his reflection appeared in the glass beside mine. He looked tired. Like he hadn't slept. Like the foundation of his world had cracked under his feet. You lied to everyone, he said. I didn't flinch. Did I? You orchestrated that entire evening to humiliate us. You orchestrated years of humiliation for me. I just returned the favor with better taste. You could have said something. At the time. And who would have believed the maid over the Hawthorns? He looked at the brooch. It wasn't me who took it. But you didn't stop them. You watched. And then you turned your back. His jaw clenched. I thought it was just another scandal. Something beneath me. But it wasn't, was it? No, I said softly. It was the beginning. We stood in silence for a while. I expected him to storm out. To insult me. To dig one final dagger in before disappearing. But instead, he asked, why this way? I turned to face him fully. Because if I walked up to your door and asked for an apology, you'd never answer. But if I bought the entire house and invited you in as a guest? You'd listen. He nodded slowly, bitterly. And Lena? She's not my concern. Not anymore. He hesitated. She's ruined, you know. Last night's whispers, they'll follow her for years. I raised an eyebrow. And you? He met my eyes. I'll survive. But I'll remember. Good, I said. That was the point. He gave a small, almost reluctant nod. Then he left. No goodbye. Just quiet steps echoing down the marble hall. When the door clicked shut, I closed my eyes and exhaled. It wasn't forgiveness. I didn't want that. It wasn't revenge in its loudest form. No headlines. No lawsuits. Just exposure. Just silence, turned inside out. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and opened the mail. Among the envelopes was one marked from Elliot. A note inside read, heard about your event. Word travels fast. I'm proud of you. I smiled. He had been the only one who believed in me without needing a reason. The only one who didn't ask about my past because he trusted I had a future. Later, I hosted a smaller gathering, this time with people I respected. Artists. Entrepreneurs. Designers. I walked them through the estate, told them about the restoration, and invited them to use the space. The home would no longer serve a single bloodline. It would serve stories. One of the guests, a writer, asked me if the house was haunted. I smiled. Not anymore. That night, I walked through the halls alone. The moon cast long shadows across the floor. I found myself in the study again, where the confrontation had taken place. The air felt lighter now. The ghosts had been exorcised, not with fire, but with truth. I poured myself a final cup of tea and sat near the fireplace. The hawthorn crest above still loomed, but beneath it, my name was etched clear and sharp. Isabel Vale. Carved into stone. Proof that I had been here. That I had risen. That I had won. I sipped my tea slowly, letting the warmth settle inside me. The house didn't hum with tension anymore. It breathed with me. I wasn't Clara the maid. I wasn't the girl who ran. I was the woman who returned. And I had made sure they'd never forget it. The invitations started arriving the week after the event. Not for galas or fundraisers, but from reporters. Lifestyle magazines. Gossip blogs. Even a few tabloids sniffing around for scandal. They had heard whispers of a mysterious woman who had hosted an unforgettable night in a historic estate once owned by the Hawthorns. Some speculated I was old money from Europe. Others claimed I had married into fortune. One article called me the silent heiress. Another said I had stolen the house from its rightful owners. I ignored them all. Let them guess. The more they talked, the more I controlled the story. My silence wasn't fear anymore. It was power. Victor sent a letter. Handwritten. Apologizing. I read it once. Then I burned it. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need it. An apology that comes after exposure isn't repentance. It's damage control. Lena didn't reach out at all. I wasn't surprised. She had always believed herself too high to bend. And now, she had fallen so far even pride couldn't catch her. I heard through mutual connections that she had been blacklisted from 2 fashion houses and quietly dropped from her social circle. Her face no longer graced event photos. She had become what she feared most, irrelevant. I thought I would feel more satisfaction. But what I felt was stillness. Like a chapter had closed without slamming. Just a quiet lock clicking into place. I channeled the momentum into building something new. The estate became more than a residence. I launched a retreat program, an invitation-only space for women rebuilding after betrayal. Artists escaping toxic contracts. Executives starting over after being ousted by their own boards. Quiet warriors like me. I named it the crest. A subtle nod to the symbol that once stood for everything I was beneath. Now it stood for what I had risen above. I hosted dinners not for status, but for story sharing. I watched women sit where I once stood, now clothed in power, not apology. One night, Elliot visited again. He leaned in the doorway, watching me adjust the flower arrangements on the long dining table. "You always did like controlling the centerpiece," he said. I smiled. "I control the whole table now." He chuckled. "I knew from the day we met that you weren't just building a business. I was building a way back." "And now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "I build forward." We sat in the library that night, drinking wine and listening to the wind against the windows. He asked if I ever thought about selling. I laughed. "This house? Never. It's not just mine. It's proof." He looked around. "You made it beautiful." I made it honest. That night, before bed, I opened the box at the back of my closet. The old uniform was still there. Folded neatly. Pressed like a secret. I didn't take it out. I just looked at it for a long moment. Then I closed the lid again. It didn't haunt me. It didn't hurt. It reminded me. Every stitch of that fabric had witnessed my silence, my fall, my vow. And now it was stored away, retired like a relic from a war that had already been won. I fell asleep to the sound of the wind and woke to the light touching the curtains like a gentle hand. The kind of morning that feels like an answer. I brewed my own tea. No staff. No ceremony. Just me, in a silk robe, standing barefoot on heated floors I used to mop. I carried my cup to the balcony and looked out over the land. The same land I once fled with tears in my eyes. The same land I now owned. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed. Maybe someone whispered about the woman in the mansion again. Maybe another rumor would start. Let them wonder. Let them imagine. I no longer needed to be seen. I had become the shadow behind the legend. And that was enough. It started with a knock on the gate. 1 year to the day since the tea party that undid them. I was reviewing the guest list for the next Crest residency when the intercom lit up. A delivery? I wasn't expecting anything. I checked the screen. It wasn't a delivery. It was Mrs. Grimsby. Older now. Stooped. Still clutching her leather-bound appointment book like it was armor. I hadn't seen her since the day she ordered me out of the house without proof, without pause. I almost didn't open the gate. But I was curious. I met her at the front door. She looked up at me, eyes wide with something between awe and dread. "Miss Vale," she said, voice cracking. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me." "I remember everything," I replied. She swallowed hard. "I heard about the house. About what happened last year. I thought you might let me see it. One last time." I studied her face. The once pinched expression had collapsed into lines and shadows. Regret had softened her, but it hadn't changed the past. I opened the door without a word and let her step inside. She moved slowly, glancing around like she expected the walls to speak. "I spent 20 years managing this house," she whispered. "Thought I knew every crack in the foundation. But I never saw you. You never looked." She nodded. "That was my mistake." I led her to the parlor. She stared at the brooch in the case, then at the fireplace, then finally at the crest above it, still weathered, still proud. And below it, etched clean and sharp, my name. She blinked fast. "You carved yourself in." "I didn't need anyone else's permission." "No," she said. "You never did." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out. A folded envelope. She held it toward me. "I found this in the old office drawer. After everything came out." It was a reference letter. One you wrote, years ago, when you wanted to apply to a hotel job. I never mailed it. I didn't think it mattered. I took it silently. I remembered that letter. The one I typed up at midnight, after my shift, asking for her signature. She never gave it. I stared at the envelope. Then I set it down on the table, untouched. "It doesn't matter now," I said. She nodded slowly. "You turned into something stronger than any letter could have made you." She turned to go, pausing at the door. "I'm sorry, Clara. Truly." I didn't answer. Not with words. Just a quiet nod. That was all she'd get. And all I needed to give. After she left, I stood in the foyer, watching the gates close behind her. Then I walked upstairs to the room that had once belonged to the Hawthorne matriarch. My room now. I sat at the desk and wrote a new letter, this time, not asking for anything. Just offering a recommendation for one of my staff, a young woman from the same town I came from, smart and quick and far too silent. She wouldn't need to claw her way up the way I did. I'd build her a staircase. That afternoon, I hosted tea again. Not with linen gloves or forced smiles. Just 5 women gathered in the garden. All of them survivors in their own way. One had left a cruel marriage. Another had walked away from a family fortune that came with strings. All of them laughed freely, without checking who might be listening. I poured their tea myself. And when one of them asked what this place used to be, I smiled. It used to belong to a family who thought money meant power. But now it belongs to women who know better. The sun dipped low. Laughter echoed through the trees. The past had been loud. But the future, this future, was quiet, grounded, steady. That night, I stood once more in front of the fireplace, the crest above me, my name beneath it. I touched the locket at my neck, still cold, still silver. My mother once told me that silence can be a shield, but it should never be a cage. I used to be the maid. The one who blended into the wallpaper. The one who was framed, blamed, and cast out. Now I wore the crest. And they would never forget the day they were invited back, just to drink the tea I served. Because that was the moment they realized they hadn't destroyed me. They had introduced me to everything I would one day own.